All right, everybody, it's 6 o'clock. I now call the meeting of the Silver Falls School District Board of Directors to order. Our first agenda item is to note attendance, and I actually can't see everybody. I'm assuming everybody's there. Can y'all give me a thumbs up if everybody's there? All right, I like it. Okay, the next part of our agenda is to agree on our agenda, the agenda review.
Move to approve the agenda as published.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda as published. So let's get into our discussion item. We only have one at this point, and it is our superintendent position. We have placed 2 items in board book for your...
Jennifer, we didn't vote on the agenda review. I don't mean to interrupt, but we didn't vote on the agenda review.
Oh, we didn't vote.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Just want to make sure we're procedurally right.
Yes, we need to do that. Sorry. Let's go ahead and take a vote unless anybody has discussion around the agenda review.
Jennifer.
All right.
Jennifer.
Yes.
Derek.
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
Aaron.
Yes.
Owen.
Yes.
Phil.
Yes.
Josh.
Yes.
All in favor.
Thank you. Okay, so back on 3A, the superintendent position, there are 2 attachments in board book. One is our policy CBB about the recruitment and appointment of the superintendent. That's there for our reference. Lisa may reference it today. And then Lisa also sent us a short little snippet of executive session rules, and she's going to try to explain to us the connection kind of between the statutes and our policy and what we can and cannot do in executive session. And so with that, I am going to introduce Lisa Fraley. She is our counsel from WESD. So this is a service that we automatically pay for as a membership to WESD. And so we don't pay extra for Lisa's services, which is good for us in our particular situation right now. And she has a lot of experience. She's advised us in the past around these kinds of issues. And what I've asked her to do is kind of walk us through what our options are regarding how we move forward with the superintendent position. So some of the words that we might throw around today are acting, interim, permanent. There might be other words that could be substituted there, but right now we have an acting superintendent. Dan is our acting. Dan is not interested in the long-term position. So we are going to at some point transition to an interim. And there are some natural breaks in the calendar that might help facilitate that, but we don't have to use those. And then there is the idea of, eventually shifting into a permanent. We don't have to make all those decisions right now, but I think it's really important that we as a board understand the options that we have and kind of the procedures around those options. So with that, Lisa, would you please take it away?
Thank you, Jennifer. And I apologize for not being able to be there in person. I had already had some plans that took me out of the area, and so I'm having to appear here virtually. But hopefully you can hear me well, and if you've got any questions, we can kind of answer them. For those of you I haven't had a chance to meet, Jennifer did a great job of giving me an introduction. My name is Lisa Fraley. I have been practicing in solely in K-12 education and public sector law for over 33 years. I do have to confess I must have started at 5 because I can't possibly be old enough to have been doing this for 33 years. But so I have had a lot of experience in dealing with both school board issues like this and school district issues. So as Jennifer pointed out, she wanted me to kind of take a look and see and provide you some assistance and advice regarding what the next steps might be regarding the recent vacancy that occurred as a result of the resignation of your superintendent and some of the legal requirements that surround those options. Those options are going to be governed by the executive session provision I gave you, which is 192.660 sub 2A and sub 7 sub D. It also is going to be governed by your policy, which is CBB. I will tell you, having reviewed your policy and looked at it, it is very consistent and follows pretty consistently with what the requirements are under the statute in 192.660. So the two work together kind of nicely for those purposes as we move forward. There obviously are opportunities and situations where boards don't always follow our policy exactly, and there are often reasons for that. I would tell you that if you decide, my advice to you would be that if you decide not to follow the policy CBB that you've got, that there, you have that conversation in this type of a public meeting so the public can understand the circumstances which are leading you to make a decision different in using a different process that exists. If you look at CBB, you'll see that it basically kind of outlines the procedure for, declaring a vacancy, adopting criteria, guidelines, practices, and policies and processes. It talks about community involvement and adoption at public meetings. Those are all the standard practices that exist, which allow you to access the option of using an executive session in 2A for your selection process. Because when you look at 192.660.2A, it basically does say that you have the option of conducting the selection process of a chief executive officer, which in your case would be a superintendent, in executive session. The key to the 2A is that you have to also comply with section 7 down at the bottom, which talks about the adoption of basically what I would refer to as qualities and qualifications, criteria, procedures, processes, and allow for the public to have some input in those, and then adopt them at a public meeting before you then kind of recess into executive session. So the public is at least aware of the process that you've agreed to, even though they aren't going to be able to see it and participate in it until later in that process. And those really do kind of create that statute and those policies create the foundation, right, for the next steps going forward as you select a superintendent. Are there any specific questions about the statute, how it works, those kinds of pieces? Now, you can select a superintendent without going through those steps, but if you were to do so without going through those steps, those meetings would have to occur in a public session. In other words, the public would just be able to observe, right? Participate is definitely the wrong word, but they would have the right to observe the process you were going through, the interviews, the candidates, the selection process, all the way down to the decision, as you're trying to analyze and make a decision. So nothing requires you to have gone through the more extended process, but we would limit your ability to access an executive session were you to skip those steps, right? And I have worked with school districts that have been able to complete those steps in somewhat of a more expedited process. It doesn't have to take 3 or 4 months to get all those steps done, but it does take some time because you have to have a process where you've got some suggestions out there, the community gets to engage and give you feedback before you adopt, okay? So you could do it without it. You probably are going to have to use a public session to do so. If you wish to use an executive session, then we've got some steps we have to go through in order to be able to do that. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, I see some heads nodding.
Not totally.
That's a really great summary. So I'll let the other board members ask any questions before I ask my question? Does anybody have a question for Lisa at this point?
Well, I've got a question, hearing this, if let's just make up a hypothetical. If, not saying advocating this, just asking it. If at tonight's meeting, we decided in public session, we wanted to name Joe Smith interim superintendent for a given time, say the remainder of the school year, what do we have to do to be able to make that happen? Can we just do that? Or is there more process to that?
I would encourage, because doing that would not be in compliance with your policy on CBB. I'd like you to at least have had a conversation why you weren't going to follow policy CBB before you made that decision, so that the public would know. I mean, because you have put a policy statement out there saying this will be the process we follow, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're not going to follow that, I think you need to have a conversation as to why, the why of that. But yes, you could in fact make a motion, but at that point you would literally be hiring someone without adopting any selection criteria. I mean, it would be a motion to hire Joe Smith. There would be a discussion, there would be a vote, and then it would either pass or fail at that point.
Okay, I'll take it one further. Let's say that as a board we sat here and discussed, we came up, part of our meeting, we came up with just the number 3-4 criteria that was important for our candidate, our person to have, and publicly discuss that and hash that out. Does that tilt anything here or change anything? Or
I think a discussion's good. I don't think a discussion is the sole criteria or element that exists in both that policy and the statute. There also has to be an opportunity for the public to actually have feedback in that process and to participate in the conversation about the qualities or the qualifications or the criteria you're going to use in selecting the next superintendent.
Okay, and then last question for somebody else. Do the labels matter? Acting, interim, permanent? Is it the same for all?
No, I don't think the titles really matter. I do think that there are some legitimate reasons that could be explained as to why you didn't follow CBB if you were applying different labels, right? So, for instance, I think it might be a very reasonable statement to the public that we know CBB is there. We intend to follow it when hiring a replacement for our superintendent, but for purposes of a short-term fill of a position, we're going to skip these steps and we're going to just appoint Joe Smith tonight. Okay. Right? I mean, that to me seems like labels might then become important, but they only become important in terms of the conversation with the public you're having about why you are or are not following your policy.
Right. Okay.
Is there any legal liability in doing that with regards to, like Phil was saying, you know, if we wanted to move forward with selecting an interim, meaning defined duration, and later for the permanent process, you know, we'd probably go through obviously the CBB, but are we opening ourselves up to any potential legal liability, specifically financial?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously I can't account for everybody out there who might want to file some sort of legal action, because there are legal actions that are filed that, in my opinion, have little to no merit attached to them, right? But districts do occasionally not follow their policies, you know, to the letter every single time, and there really aren't a whole lot of challenges with that unless there are something as a part of that decision that creates liability. Like your failure to go through that process. As a result of your failure, have you ended up hiring somebody that, if you had gone through the proper process, you would have screened out a candidate that, you know, embezzled or created some other liability for you? That would be where the challenge would come in terms of where the risk lies in the failure to go through that process. But there really is limited, especially if you were to explain your position, there will be limited liability for failure to follow CBB in a short-term capacity.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to share with other board members, I had a chance to look at Tualatin Tigard's school board work session from, I think it was like March 3rd, 5th, something around that time. They're looking at filling an interim superintendent spot. They had an advisor from OSBA on with them, walking them through the process. I took a bunch of notes. And I, in fact, kind of started along the lines, kind of a draft that at some point I'll share with our chair and the rest of you, just that if we decide to go through an interim process, this is what a neighboring or a close district had done at the guidance of OSBA. I thought it was a very helpful process to kind of go through what it looks like. There's parts of that, as Lisa alluded to, on how you go through that process. Some are in open session, some of those are in executive session. But that's something that definitely I think we can review as a board. I think we have, in my mind, that would be for more of what I would see as the interim superintendent, which in my mind would start July 1st. I think we have an acting, or if we need to change the acting from now until June 30th, as Lisa explained, that's within our rights. But I think the process, again, for full transparency of our public, and just to get the input, given everything that's going on in the climate going on right now, I think we should map out a process starting for our interim selection beginning July 1st. And like I said, this was just a rough draft. I'll send it on to Jennifer and to the rest of you based on that meeting. Lisa, I'd gladly send it to you if you want to take a look at it too. I'd be glad to get your eyes on it to take a look at it and see if that's something we can play around with the different dates. I did kind of map them to certain board meetings that we have coming up, here the rest of the year. But I would advocate for a very open and transparent process with our public for an interim selection beginning July 1st. Now, again, we also have a potential, if we do desire to change an acting from now until June 30th, I think that is also within our rights to do.
Mm-hmm. And we don't, at this point, I am hoping that people can ask their questions from Lisa, and then I'd like to hear, after everybody's asked their questions, a couple of possibilities that Lisa and I have discussed, and Dan as well. But I want to make sure everybody has a chance to at least ask Lisa about the things that she's presented right now.
Okay, based on, understand what she's presented without having the knowledge of what you're talking about, though, that may bring on other questions.
Yes, it will, but I just want to make sure everybody's understood the basics that Lisa's presented right now, before we move on into the discussion of what do we want to do.
So I guess I have one, so just be patient with me here. The only time that by reading this policy, that we would be able to go into executive session would just be to consider the employment of somebody, not whether we would fill, not fill. I'm trying to understand what 2A is actually saying in real world layman terms, and not a bunch of legalese. I'm having a hard time understanding what this actually means or doesn't mean.
So I think that's a really good question. Let me try and distinguish some categories for you, some different functions or portions of the selection process. So the conversation we're having tonight about, do we want to have a permanent replacement starting on April 1, which, by the way, I know is not a reasonable expectation, but do we want to go and find a permanent person right now? Do we want to find an interim? When would that interim start? Do we want an acting? All of those conversations need to happen in a public session, right? The public needs to participate as we or at least be able to watch us, not participate, but watch us as we make those decisions. When it comes to the actual process that we would use for identifying candidates that we would like to talk to, interview, consider for employment for this position, if we were to go through the steps in both your policy on CBB and which basically match the obligations in that 7D section I gave you, all those kind of legal words. If you go through that process in CBB, you would be allowed to conduct the actual interviewing and selection process in an executive session, and not have to do it in public, which sometimes encourages additional candidates to participate in a potential search, because they can do so in a safe environment without their current employer knowing that they are looking for another job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions about the basic process before we open up the next layer? Okay, so when Lisa and I talked yesterday, one of the things that we discussed is that where do the candidates come from? Because we can have internal candidates, we can have external candidates. One thing she mentioned was that the WESD has a list of retired superintendents that are available sometime, potentially available to do short-term kind of work as, acting or interim superintendents for school districts. Another option that happened or that was discussed yesterday, and maybe I don't know if Owen wants to chime in either, because I think Dan and Owen were both in the room when there was a different offer of, like, hey, you could consider this as well. Dan or Owen, do you guys want to speak to that?
Well, I guess I'll speak to that. So yesterday when we met with WSD, I'm sure Dan knew this, but it was new for me. WSD does, from time to time, enter into intergovernmental agreements with school districts whereby the WSD superintendent would serve in a interim capacity for a short duration of time for a school district like ours. They do that at no cost, and to the district, no additional cost. And with that comes the assistance of their financial team as well. So that's a possibility that we have to consider as well.
Would we be able to use their financial team if we did not use their superintendent as an acting or interim superintendent?
My sense was that they would be available to help Kim, probably not to the same level of assistance. Maybe Kim,
I believe it is independent of the appointment,
Okay.
of any other appointment that as part of a component district that is part of our support service.
And so, Lisa, go ahead.
So I did talk to Joe Morlock about that today because that question had come up. And Aaron, those are completely separate. You would still have access to assistance from the financial department as you work through this. The positive thing about potentially contemplating the ESD is that the current superintendent that is serving in that capacity has been through a situation very similar to this when he started over in Newburgh. Newburgh was running on basically no cash, and he literally had to go in and solve a bunch of financial issues before he could really get that district kind of back on track and moving forward. So there's a lot of similarities to some of the challenges he's already confronted and some of the work he's already done. And when you look at it, I really think that sometimes that is going to be your first, that's your immediate crisis moment, right? That is being able to figure out the finances for the rest of this year and how to pull that all together, and then the budget for the next year. And by using someone at the ESD in that capacity who's got some prior experience, it would then allow the board to engage in a more robust conversation about what kind of a leader are you looking for that will help the district move forward, given all the challenges you've just been through.
Sitting in
And-
sitting in the meetings yesterday for several hours with Joe and his team, it was, his competency was clear, his leadership ability, his understanding of the issues. I mean, it was obvious that he had an immense depth of knowledge and experience in these kind of situations.
I was also hoping that Dan and or Kim could chime in. I think I mentioned before that Dan's not interested in the long-term superintendency, but he does, care about how we proceed. And I was hoping that we could get a little bit from Dan and Kim about what they want to see in the superintendent or acting interim. What do we need to get us through this rough patch we have here, where we're going back and looking at what happened, we're figuring out what we have, and then we're looking forward to how do we balance the budget. So I'm hoping Dan or Kim can speak to that.
Yeah, I'll go first. Okay. I think, with the road that we have in front of us, HR decisions are going to be some of the most important decisions. And so getting me back into my regular role as assistant superintendent HR, I think, is more important. And then having someone who's been through this, directing some of those, especially the financial decisions. We talked earlier today about setting that target and then how we're going to get to that target. Having someone directing that work so that the HR decisions and the HR order of operations can be followed precisely is what I feel we as a district need. So I think that this opportunity would bode well for the district because we have a significant road ahead of us, and having someone been through this, just even getting through the next 2 to 3 months is going to be significant.
Well, thank you. I actually, I was hoping to have the opportunity to share my thoughts with you. I just, the gravity, I feel like, of this decision cannot be understated. We are in uncharted territories for our district, and appointing the right leader, even if just for a short acting period, is of utmost importance to me. It is my recommendation, I will come right out and say, it is my recommendation that we appoint, even in a extremely short term through the end of this fiscal year at a minimum, the Willamette ESD to step in as our superintendent. Mr. Joe Morlock, he has been in our shoes, and there is value in that. I truly believe you learn by doing, and having somebody step in with business and financial acumen paired with extensive administrative experience in a situation just like we are in, I ask that we consider that strongly as what our district needs right now. The opportunity to be led by someone who's been through, as multiple people have said, a very, very similar financial crisis, who has significant experience in district-wide budget development, has led through the complexities of potential layoffs, reduction in force, and it avoids further disruption to our schools, to our community. I really believe we need something stable at this time. We cannot take any more surprises. So additionally, as Dan was mentioning, getting Dan Bush back to be able to focus solely on his role as assistant superintendent and possibly even more critically, director of human resources in the coming, time frame. It's going to be integral to navigating solutions to our budget deficits. So that would be my recommendation, at least as through the remainder of this current school year. I certainly understand there's big decisions to be made potentially as an interim for next year or whatever that looks like, but that would be my feedback at this time.
Thank you, Kim. And so that's a question that I have is like, if we did do, make a switch, let's say, this is one option on the table here. If we made a switch to WESD taking over the superintendency, what would be the time frame? And as Aaron mentioned, July 1st is when the new fiscal year restarts. And so to me, it would make sense to, keep that in mind and potentially make that a part of the discussion. But I wanted to hear what other people, like maybe Owen too, because you were part of those discussions yesterday, and anybody else have any thoughts about, if this were a potential option, how long would it be?
I think for the time frame, it's important that we would do that quickly because some of the changes and some of the decisions that are going to be made will be easier accomplished having a longer period of time. You can imagine if there's a furlough days or if there's a reduction in force, the more advance notice that our employees can have of those, the more planning that they are able to do for their own selves. And as far as the period of time, I would agree that I think probably through the end of this fiscal year to me would make sense. Talking with Joe, he did say that he confirmed that would be, kind of what he would expect would be required to do that job. But if circumstances turned out, it could be extended for a period of time also, if need be.
Other thoughts?
Yeah, I'm gonna. I really appreciate. Well, first of all, I want to thank the WESD for coming out yesterday with our district and Lisa and Joe and all their team that came out and really spent tons of time with us to help us through this bit of a really uncharted, tough waters for us. And so I want to thank WSD for that. And I have no doubt that Mr. Murlock has some wonderful qualities and abilities and could really provide a value for us. And no doubt he's been through this. But I hesitate, and I do want to provide a bit of a counterpoint to that in the fact that what about his understanding of our district? I think we have other things going on right now that play into this, not just the budget. And I think we have to have somebody who not only understands our financial situation, but also understands the dynamic at hand right now with our district. We've had other issues that have popped up and lots of feedback that we've received, and I think that needs to be taken into consideration. And I think maybe we also need to potentially look internally. We have some qualified people and some good people within our district that might be able to work as our acting superintendent through the end of the year, who understands our district. I think on top of the budgeting, we need to have somebody that could potentially help rally our staff, help us heal, help us focus, help us get fiscally sound, someone who has understanding of numbers. I think that there's more than just a financial fiduciary oversight here, even though that's a huge piece. I'm not trying to minimize that one bit. Mm-hmm. And no offense to Mr. Murlock's abilities, but he's an unknown entity. I don't know Joe Murlock. I mean, I've heard about him, heard he has some really wonderful qualities. He's head of the ESD as superintendent, so I know he's extremely qualified, but I just don't know I'm, given that we have such a complex organism in the Silver Falls School District, I don't know if he'll understand our dynamic. And I think at this time, it's super pivotal with our community that we need somebody who really understands our district, on top of the financial piece of it. So I'm not trying to throw something and throw, a monkey wrench in anything, but I do want to provide some counterpoint to that because I think it's healthy for this discussion. I think we're at a really important pivotal time right now in our district to get this right.
Well, I think we got two big important issues, and you brought up there, Aaron, and one is, I references, we need arms wrapped around our community and our staff right now. That's a piece. Our fiscal problems are a huge piece. And so to balance and weigh that, we got, one question I have is, it sounds like, let's just say a scenario, if we will continue to get help from ESD on this financial side, regardless, to get us through these next couple of months. Am I hearing that correctly, or am I assuming something I shouldn't be?
You are absolutely correct.
Okay.
The business service support will remain regardless of board action. Absolutely.
Okay. And then I suppose back to where we started with this, that Jennifer talked about, what do we want to look at? Is it, we don't even have this part figured out yet. Do we want, no matter who it is, do we want to change our acting till the end of the year with the idea of all them and us together coming up with our criteria and everything that we want for an interim, and then with the game plan of hiring a permanent at the beginning that would take effect July 25. And so there's those steps too. But yeah, I think anybody that we're having, it should be probably from now till July 1st for continuity and not herky-jerky. But the finance piece is huge, but knowing our community is huge. And I know for a fact, I follow those sorts of things. He has helped in several, I think there's a couple other districts he's helped get through short periods of time this way too. And successful, so it's not like, I'm saying it's not his first rodeo in doing that. But then having some of those decisions that are going to be made also need to have the feel for our community at the same time. Because there's going to be pain, no matter who's doing it. There's going to be pain.
I haven't heard from Tom yet.
Yeah, is it, how many hours a day would Mr. Morlock be here? Because he has other duties at WESD too. So is this just kind of I'm searching for the word, but is it a figurative? Is it just someone there to sign the papers, or is it how many?
In the building.
So Tom,
I did-
he didn't give me a number of hours a day. He said he would be in the district office one full day a week in person.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know how many other hours he would devote during the week.
Okay, I'm just trying to see,
Lisa might be able to answer that question.
I actually did talk to Joe this afternoon to ask him what he contemplated and saw as his role in this capacity, because I knew it would potentially come up as a question. He would see himself as being responsible to you 24/7, right? He may not physically be there every single moment of the day, but he would be responsible and serving in the capacity as your superintendent and helping to guide those decision-making, whether it's related to human resources and giving direction and feedback in that area in terms of the decisions that might need to be made financially, and getting feedback from your staff as to how to do that in a way that is consistent with the culture and community of your district. But what he would only be able to be in district physically in there. He would be meeting with staff and those kinds of things, but he in fact would be available and expects staff to basically engage him anytime they need him, and he would be available, if they needed someone on a weekend, he'd be available on a weekend. If they needed someone in the middle of the day, they could call and talk to Joe and he would deal with the issue. He would respond to email. He would do all those things on a regular basis throughout the week, even though he may only physically be on the property 1 day a week, is how he described it to me.
Lisa, would he still be available in that capacity if we selected someone other than him?
I don't know why you would do that. That would probably step on the toes of the person that you selected. So I don't know. That's a completely different, I think superintendents try to respect superintendents. So I don't know how that would play out. I think that there's two different aspects to the financial decisions you have to make. One is the actual nuts and bolts of the budget, the cuts. The other is incorporating those decisions into your educational policy and how to implement those in a way that maintain the integrity of your educational program and services to kids. And those are often best guided by someone who understands both the finances of it and the consequences of those decisions, but also has the educational background that goes with it, which is part of the reason why your business office doesn't solely make the decisions as to what programs get cut or what staff get laid off, and or where furlough days, if used or not, would be placed, because some of those have educational components to them that need to be considered. And really your educational expert that has some idea of the finances would be your best person to make those kinds of recommendations.
I guess, well, next question, just another reminder, he's free. And if we move somebody else in, say internally, they're now, so we would have an acting superintendent provided by WESD for free. But if we move someone around internally, now we're in a budget crisis. That person would be getting paid as a superintendent now, and now we have to hire someone to backfill for a few months wherever this other leader came from. So unless there's another plan to do that, but to me, 2 or 3 months, he's got a track record of doing this, not his first rodeo, and it gives us a little bit of breathing space. To me, that seems like the way to go, but I can be convinced, but I haven't. It seems like it gives us 2 or 3 months of breathing space to develop, because we got a lot of turnover in the district office, and we got to kind of have a strategic plan to fill it with, qualified people. We need some people. We need some people with district office, experience in there, and new people too. We need a turnover. So we need a strategic plan to repair the district office. How about that?
He'd be an asset to the board, guiding us in our further hiring for the interim.
Yeah,
And
right.
that sort of thing too.
Yeah.
And he would be disinterested I'm not disinterested, but he doesn't have a
It wouldn't be
horse
part of the
in
game. Yeah.
That's right. Josh, I haven't heard from you for a while.
I've been thinking about this for a while, and the information that came out today, which I was kind of expecting to not be great, was a little bit worse than I thought. And so we have gotten a lot of emails requesting really an upstanding community member to fill this position. But I'm also concerned for the amount of difficult decisions that are probably going to have to be made. And I want to insulate anybody internally within the district from making difficult decisions that may affect friends, colleagues. And so I want to be very sensitive to hiring within right now in the first couple months of having somebody probably from the outside help us make those decisions. I also am concerned about the cost, so having him come in for free helps. I do know if we probably went internally, I would almost venture that anybody we would pick from our own community would probably do it with no pay increase. They'd probably just do it to help the community because they love it. So I don't think, to your point, Tom, I don't think they would ask for anything other than what they've already have in contract.
No, Josh,
But we would have to replace them.
we'd have to replace.
Correct,
That's
I have thought about the backfill and already the instability in our buildings. So I have thought about that too, thanks for
The
bringing it
backfill
up.
is the cost that I was referring
Is
to.
destabilizing buildings any further when there really need to be changes very hard already.
But there could be other ways to look at backfills too. And
Correct.
I think, you know, our district office already has been having to deal with moving people around. And I think that given the triage of a need, and if an internal person was needed as our acting superintendent, I do think that there could be some ways that our office and our administrative team could work that out to be potentially, I'm sure it could be, I don't know, but there could be ways to minimize cost to that. I do have confidence in that. So.
And then, I guess it's pretty clear that whatever decision we need to make it fairly quickly. From like what I've been reading and just kind of getting the pulse of the community, and then hearing Dan getting back into an HR role. So I don't know what the time is table for us, but that's my thoughts on it. I do.
Well,
Yeah.
we don't have to make any kind of decision tonight. We could, just like Lisa said, that anytime we could say that we have to do it in public and say, you know, we appoint this person. One thing I'm wondering about, it sounds to me, and Derek is our master summarizer, so he can correct me if I'm wrong. If it sounds to me like people are generally interested in having some kind of process for an interim that would start on July 1st. So that's kind of one chunk that I'm hearing that is, we have interest for that. I'm hearing mixed things about the idea of contracting with WESD for the short term. That would put Joe Morlock in as acting superintendent. And from what I'm hearing, if we were to do that, that would be, you know, a contract would be through June 30th at this point in time. We could designate somebody to pursue that route and come back at our April 8th meeting with that as an option for us to discuss. But I don't know what the other option would be at this point. And I guess I'll turn it back to board members. I do need to say that I have to leave at about 6:55, and at that point Aaron will be the presiding member. So if I just leave, you know what that's about. But I wanted to turn it back to more board members to see if we have any more discussion for where we're at, if there are any more ideas out there.
Yeah, I've got a couple thoughts with Mr. Morlock. I'm kind of in line, I think, a little bit with what Aaron was saying about, I'm sure he's very capable, but not knowing him, trying to think how to say this in a public meeting. I think there's some things in the not so distant past with relationships with other boards that give me significant pause in placing him in charge of our district currently. Even recognizing some of the things that Josh mentioned about potential increased costs, but listening to our public, they're screaming for someone that can bring the community together and also handle the business decisions that have to be made. And I think one of the advantages of seriously considering that option is that immediate built-in trust. And so I think, not saying that he wouldn't be capable, but I think for me to be comfortable that there need to be a little bit more of a vetting process and seeing some kind of qualifications just for some of the other things I've become aware of.
I think we can call it like it is right now. We have a major fractured trust in our district right now. I'm not going to dance around it anymore. We need to fix that. The budget is part of that. Staff is part of that. And I think we need an individual who can unite us right now. And I'm going to emphasize the importance. We have one shot right now to do that.
Yeah.
And it's super important right now because our community, our staff, our principals, everybody deserve that right now.
Is Kim still going to get the help that she needs?
She said she would.
100%.
Yeah.
Our component, ESD, Willamette ESD, is there for us regardless of which way the board goes. So that is not a factor in this. It's what is best for our community. And of course, I might be a little biased on the financial side right now because that's the load. But I really appreciate hearing, your feedback as well. You are right. Our number one, we have a budget. It's hard for me to say, but the fractured trust is definitely.
I don't know if we can put one
key.
above the other.
It's 1A and 1B.
Exactly. So, thank you
Well,
guys.
For me, the way I guess simplest way that this come to my mind is that our fiscal house is on fire. And I feel like we need to call the fire department on that. And they're going to come in and they're going to break some windows, cut some holes in the roof, soak it down with water, and put the fire out. And then after that time, we come back in and rebuild. Because if we don't get our fiscal house in order, bottom line is it could become to a point where we literally need to shut the doors, before the end of school because we don't have the money to keep going or have another significant disruption that would occur next year. Thinking about the possible internal candidates, I think we have a lot of good ones. But I don't see in any of them, this is not a knock on them, but I don't see in any of them the district office leadership experience in that finance role. And I do think that it puts any of them, because they all have significant relationships with their colleagues and with their staff, it puts them in a very difficult position to actually make decisions that may need to be made for the betterment of the district. And I think that somebody from the outside that is, again, interested but disinterested, who doesn't have those relationships and things to divide their decision making, I think that would, to me, that's the route that I feel pretty strongly we need to go. And then look at that interim position to, take a hard look at our local candidates.
Yeah, I guess here, and I would just add to that. I like the idea of hiring internal candidates, but let's get the fire out right now. I like the analogy.
I do think we'd be wary of the public perception of that. And that's
Yeah.
a big factor of our staff and also our public, that we need to look at, if we bring somebody from the outside, it could be perceived as, the board just brought in, somebody to make cuts and do this with no feelings. And also, given what's going on right now in the feelings department here in our district, that could perceive as being a negative on our board. So, yet, maybe I'll throw some counterpoint right now, okay?
Well,
yeah.
That the counterpoint to you, Owen, is maybe we do have an internal candidate or candidates or qualified folks that, that maybe that in that case, if they had to make some hard choices, that they could do that with grace and it might be well received. Not well received, but better received. Nothing is well received in that circumstance, but better received.
Been around some situations in the past like that, and to be honest, sometimes that makes it harder. It really does, because not to be callous, but if I come in and I can still be human, I can still be friendly, but I don't necessarily know the person. I don't, I mean, we don't have coffee with each other, our kids don't play together, et cetera, et cetera. It's easier to get to that point of some of these tough decisions that will have, there's no doubt about it, there's gonna have to be made. There's gonna be, and, because of the situation that all of us, one way or another, played a part in getting us here. And I think sometimes that person that comes from the outside that's not as tied, they have an advantage if they're a competent person in this, and that is one advantage we have, track record of knowing that. And I think it's imperative that we make it very clear that both for interim and eventually permanent both, that we as a board are going to commit to vetting and screening and everything like it's never been seen before. And that we get the person, and if that person's internal, that's fantastic. If they're not, but somebody that fits our community and fits who we are. And I think that might have been, a missing component. And so we've got things to do now. One thing that somebody mentioned it, when and this has bothered me from the get-go on thinking about this, we can all rattle off several people in our district that would be welcomed and very, competent for most of the things that need done for running our district. But then whatever school community they come from, that school community is affected. And backfill, it's just like we're doing now to our schools, we're doing and with some of the other staff. And the staffs are seeming to willingness to take on those burdens when they need to, but maybe if we have a time that we don't need to and accomplish the same thing, it might be nice not to have to disrupt the building. But
I'm gonna butt in for my last word. You guys are gonna have to figure out how to proceed without me, which you're fully capable of doing. I'm not trying to say that I have more importance than I do. But what I wanted to say is that I wonder if we could approach this kind of like we had been approaching the budget deficit, like let's get more information about the TAN, let's get more information about furloughs, and keep them both alive. Keep them both alive. So what I'm hearing is that there are some people who are interested in appointing an internal candidate for maybe interim or acting, I don't know. And then there are some people who are still interested in this idea of having somebody from the outside, like Joe Morlock from WESD, because it's free and it will give us some time to get our interim process going. So if we want to do that, I think we need to appoint somebody to keep that option alive between now and April 8th. And maybe that's Dan, maybe that's Owen, I have no idea, but I just want to leave you guys and say I trust you, and I can't wait to hear what you came up with at the end of this meeting. Bye.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks, Jennifer.
has anything been said in conversations, Owen, with what his suggestions or would be as far as when we start this, like the day after spring break, after our next board meeting? Any kind of has that been banded around at all?
Yeah, he felt that as soon as possible would be the best.
Right.
And as soon as possible is dictated a little bit by how quickly an intergovernmental agreement could be reached. this is not a new, we're not creating a new wheel here, so.
Right.
They're just taking existing intergovernmental agreement.
Yeah.
Modifying it to fit our circumstances, setting out things clearly so that everybody's expectations are, in black and white.
Right.
Again, it's a zero-cost agreement, so that obviously limits some of the risk as well. But yeah, as soon as possible.
I have a question, sorry, you done?
No, go ahead.
So I would assume that he has relationships in high places that we probably don't have with our situation, like for contacts regarding funding solutions, people who could help us out. I'm sure he has resources available to him that we're probably not thinking of, correct?
Well, I would just say that, they service so many contracts, the WSD does. And, obviously he being in Salem, works really closely with ODE on that. And, they joined us yesterday for conversations there.
Okay.
I think the biggest asset, though, is just the previous experience of negotiating a significant budget issue, and how do you come in and initiate reductions in forces and layoffs and things of that nature.
And so that then leads me to Derek. You had mentioned, I don't have any knowledge of this guy, but it sounds like you do. Can you expand what you meant?
Probably not in a public meeting, but if you do yeah,
Is it public knowledge?
it's public knowledge. There's been,
Well, let's not talk.
yeah, I don't want to
Okay.
discredit an individual, but there are things that are easily accessible through open source information.
I would, for me, I'm not comfortable making a decision tonight, but I would like to talk to more people, particularly the internal candidates that we may or not be talking about, and see how they feel. I don't want to I'd like to talk to them.
Well, the one thing I think that Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong here, if we do have internal candidates, that has to be done in an open session, correct?
That is correct. I would not encourage you to engage in a lot of, especially if each of you go and have conversations with these candidates. I think it could potentially be interpreted as some form of a serial meeting.
Gotcha.
So then how are we supposed to know if they're comfortable with the situation right now, if they're even willing?
Well, I mean, I think it's the burden is on us to have a discussion, and bring potential.
I think we have the discussion, and then, we just got to be prepared if we ask them to do something or, to do this, and they
They say no.
say no. And then we back up and, okay, we'll try this then.
But it's at least the process, like Lisa said, is transparent.
Right.
We're here discussing it. We're naming folks that, I think every one of us probably have folks in our minds that might be able to be capable and have a short list that we could talk through if we desire to. I know it's really uncomfortable to do it in open session. I acknowledge that.
Part of the territory.
But it is what it is, and it's a legal requirement.
Well, or would it be more like, Dan, you probably correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but couldn't we open up the position to internal candidates only and see who applies?
Well, I think, as Lisa would,
Essentially, something like
I
that.
think, again, I think the if you go to the policy, and you've got to go through the process of declaring a vacancy, you've got to go through the public process of establishing qualities and qualifications. If you're going to run a process for a superintendent, there are particular steps you have to follow in doing that.
Even for just changing acting?
She said no.
Yeah, so let's be clear. You could literally vote tonight, say, all in favor of Joe Smith, raise your hand, and you could have and that could be an acting, it could be an interim, it could be a permanent.
Right.
Okay? And that's all done in public session. Dan's right, that if you want to go through and do a more robust search for whether it's an interim or a permanent, I guess you could do it for an acting, then you would go through the process of developing community input and Q&Qs, and you could use the executive session portions of it. But if you're willing to live with the public session portion of this, you don't have to do any of those things. You have the conversation in public, you have the debate, and you make a decision. I would tell you, my own experience with this has been some of these decisions that have to be made have to be made pretty quickly. You're going to have to turn some of these financial decisions on a dime, which is unusual for a large organization like yourself, because you're going to need some savings, and that savings decreases with each day that we wait before making some of those decisions. And you are going to have some legal criteria that you have to follow in order to make some of those decisions, right? It will involve following collective bargaining agreements and notices and potentially statutory requirements over changes to work calendars or work years. And that in and of itself will take time, right? So I think the smart look might be, what are we going to do from here until June?
Right.
Yes.
And I like the idea, what you guys are thinking about, a more robust process from July 1 to June 30th. And then maybe what you do, once you get an interim in there, and I use that term specifically because it's a longer term, more than an acting would be, then you go through the search next year for a permanent that would go through even maybe a more robust process in order to find a good fit, right?
And I think you hit it pretty good, well said, Lisa. I think we need from here on out using the interim label as July 1 on. What we have before us now is acting. And I think, as Jennifer stated earlier, I think we've got some fairly good, not consensus, but interest in saying, let's work out and map out a process for that July interim spot. The question now, as Lisa said, is we need to make a decision potentially on an acting before us between now to June 30th. That is what we have before us. And I think, Lisa, thank you for clarifying the process that, as she said, we could say, have a discussion about a Joe Smith, and if we all are comfortable, we could appoint Joe Smith as acting tonight, if that is the desire of the board.
What about on the acting piece? Talk that, and I think we're pretty settled on, from July 1 on, where we want to go from this point on, and can progress on that further meetings. But as far as the acting piece, what about the idea of, we've got good people. We know that we've got good people in our buildings and everything, as far as that are well known and liked in the community and everything like this. And what about them, approaching one of them? You'd have to have one, but approaching one of them to be in a advisory or supporting role for Joe, as far as that community piece, and they're not a decision maker. You get what I'm saying? They're not a decision maker. They're not in competition with anything Joe has, but just the idea of a go-to for him, not the other way around. Not us, our staffs going to him, but him going to.
Interesting.
I see what you're saying. I think
A resource.
I think it's important too to remember that Joe would be our employee, would be the board's employee, right? And so we would be responsible to give him some direction and some directive about, as he's, making his decisions, that he would need to follow. And I think that's not a bad idea. He's going to need to get.
We just, say, hey, stay in contact with Joe Smith.
He's going to have a resource to be able to understand our community.
Yeah, but
I guess the other thing I come back to is the commitment is 1 day a week out of 5. Like, I just don't think that's good enough right now. What's going on the other 4 days of the week? I understand you can give broad directions and objectives, but I think we're going to want someone that also understands the felt impact of those decisions. And I just don't know if you can do that if you're just in the office 1 day a week.
It's a good point, Derek.
And I'm reluctant to, I know it's not fully turning the keys of the castle over to somebody, but again, no offense to Mr. Morlock, I don't know him. I don't know his demeanor. I don't know his personality. And maybe that's a little touchy-feely here when we're talking about budgets and X's and O's and numbers here, but I don't know what his staff interactions are like. I haven't had that time to do a research on somebody like on him. Again, he comes well regarded. I have no doubt of his capabilities. He'd probably do a wonderful job. But again, we have to come back and say, is that the only thing we need right now? And I know the house is on fire. I get it, right? But do we have people within our district that are capable of doing that and rallying our district office, rallying our staff, rallying our teachers, helping be an accessory to Kim and Dan and the business office to help right the ship? And the question is, do we? And I think we do. So.
Well, I think we're guessing at that if we think we do, because I don't think we have, documented experience at doing that.
Fair enough.
Right.
Fair enough.
What's the next step? Oh, sorry.
I'm gonna go outside the lines here. Glad you're here, Lisa. Tell me if I'm messing up. Aaron, as chair right now, you could help me too. Is it appropriate, we've got an administrator here in-house. Is it appropriate for us to ask him a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if he wants to answer the
Do you have
question,
any
he can choose
objection?
to answer it or not.
I think our legal counsel spoke. I don't.
Okay. Kevin, could you share you've listened to all this and you know our district better than anyone up here probably. Could you share your thoughts? Not putting you on the spot or anything.
You might need to come up to the mic.
Yeah.
Oh, dear.
I'm going. I'm going. Yeah.
I'm gonna pay for this later, I know it.
Problems.
Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for everything you guys are saying. I really value the conversation and what Kim and Dan have to say as well. You guys have made some excellent points. I think, watching the board meeting today, the 1 o'clock meeting, it seemed like things were bigger or getting bigger than, what we initially thought even. And, at the risk of seeming, maybe unthankful or averse to what like all the social media has been saying and things like that, because I do feel like people have been very supportive of thinking that I would be a good person for this job. I will do whatever our district needs to help out. I want to long-term be the Butte Creek principal. That's what I love. That's the place I need to be. In between, if there's a way I could support people, help get things back rolling well, I will certainly do that. I think the idea of having the ESD step in, I've never heard anything but positive about Joe Morlock. I don't know him, but I've only heard good things. And I think having somebody like that, or even like a Dave Novotny or somebody, like of that stature that's been through this kind of thing and can hit the ground running pretty well, I think that would be something you really have to consider strongly, guys. And I know you are considering that strongly. I really do. Just to be very honest, that's what I think would likely be the best type of move for our district, because there's so much to do. Like Lisa Freely said, and I've worked with Lisa for several years, on and off. There is stuff that needs to be done yesterday, financially and logistically, that just can't wait. It just can't. So
Could-
if there's a way I can support that, I'll do it.
Could I say something? You know, Phil, I think your suggestion, the word that came to my mind was the term ombudsman, that type of role. And you have a guy sitting here before you who would be the perfect person for that. You know, when I came to this district 5 years ago, that I wouldn't say it was a different kind of fire. And Kevin helped me and helped a lot of people through a really difficult time. And so, you know, I've obviously kind of let you know my preference, and I really appreciate Kevin's comments. But if Kevin wanted to fill that role of that you're describing, Phil, he is the perfect person for that. And and I'm going to need your help a lot. And so I just want to echo that because I really appreciate Kevin's comments.
Thank you, Kevin. This is super helpful, and again, given this is a work session, it is a brainstorm. It's a brainstorm in public, and this is unprecedented, uncharted waters for our district right now.
For sure.
So yeah, we're kind of drawing stuff up in the dirt here in a legal setting, right? Which is good.
Yeah.
Let me throw this out based on what we've heard here just a few minutes ago, and I think this is where great ideas come around. So, is if we did utilize somebody like Joe Morlock in the WASD, but we appointed, and I concur with Dan, I don't think there's a better ambassador to help us with something like this than Kevin. Kevin's been around long enough with our district, the respect of our teachers, of our principals. I think he could help us desperately during this time, and still not leave a hole at Butte Creek. And I think that I obviously things could be creative there, but how could we utilize him as, Joe's helping us on the really nuts and bolts. He'd be our administrator, he would be our superintendent, but in a way, Kevin's our man on the street. Kevin is you're going to be our hugger, all right? You're going to be our person who goes out and helps, right? Like, and helps our district, and could be one that really would help us to work on gaining trust within our district back. And I think Kevin would be excellent at that.
I just am so grateful for the recommendation to bring him up, because it means a lot to hear from you. Super grateful for you.
You get even.
What?
You can get even on me. Thank you.
So it sounds like we probably need to do two things, right? Then we need to appoint a board member or Dan
Thanks, Kevin.
to work with the WESD
Thanks, Kevin.
thank you, Kevin, towards an intergovernmental agreement.
Mhm.
Obviously, we're not making that decision tonight that that's what we're going to do, but in order to preserve that as an opportunity for us at the April 8th meeting, we would need to have something to look at there. And then it sounds like we might need a couple of board members to maybe brainstorm and come up with some kind of a job description around what we just talked about with Kevin in terms of what that role might look like.
Mhm.
I mean, is that
I
there's a suggestion?
absolutely agree. I think he has to be involved.
Is our financial piece, what do we like as far as decisions before, what is it, April 8th is our meeting?
I do think that's a little too far out. I do think that, I think we need to take advantage of spring break from an operational standpoint,
Right.
to get some stuff done. So I was going to ask Lisa, in terms of how can you explain the intergovernmental? I'm somewhat familiar with it, but can you explain to me, can the board authorize me to work on that? What's your recommendation there?
And then we just stamp it on the 8th.
Does the board, would it have to come back to the board for formal approval then?
Yeah, we would want the board to approve it, but you could potentially, remember, you can conduct a meeting with 24 hours notice. You don't have to wait to the 8th. The board could, and it could literally be the sole item on an agenda. You could do it to just literally review it. It would be provided to the board members in advance. You'd have the opportunity to review it and you could approve it, and that would be the sole function, maybe a little bit earlier, so that you could get it done and in place before the 8th, right? Dan, I totally get what the problem is here in terms of some of the decisions. But yes, the board could appoint or delegate to carry out the administrative task of developing. And by the way, I provided a sample of an IGA. The Newburgh one has some of unique language in it because of some of the issues that were specific to Newburgh, with a lot of the litigation that was ongoing that would not be relevant to the case we're talking about now. But it gives you some kind of the flavor of what that IGA would look like, and then you have to put in the things that are relevant to Silver Falls. But that IGA could be put together pretty quickly and brought back as long as the board would delegate somebody to do the legwork on that, whether it's Dan, whether it's Owen, whether it's Dan and Owen together, because I know that there's been some conversations with Owen in the room with Joe. So he heard some of the conversations. That might make it easier. But between the two of you, you could do that work.
So Lisa, tonight would we have to take a vote to designate Owen and Dan tonight as to pursue the next steps with Joe Morlock?
Yes, I would recommend that.
And what would be your best guess as a litigator as far as looking at IGAs in general? What's a reasonable time frame for this getting together? In other words, that we could be able to put it together and act on it.
I bet you could put it together pretty quickly, especially if you use the Newburgh one. Some of it, the language is pretty standard language of an IGA. It talks about the mutuality of the public agencies and the desire. I mean, IGAs are used when there's a desire to cooperate between two public entities.
Right.
So if you're using some of that, it would probably go pretty fast. You could probably, I don't want to speak for Dan and Owen if they were to do this, but I would think you could probably turn it around in a week and a half.
Okay.
And then just a question, as part of that IGA, would we get some information about Joe? Like, many of us don't know him. We're hearing good things, but is there like a work history or some type of resume that we'd be able to review? Or is it just we vote and he's the guy?
I'm sure I can't speak for him, but I would assume that he has a current CV and a resume and that kind of information that he would make available to us.
He had to have had something when he applied for the Willamette ESD position. I would imagine he could provide you a packet similar to that.
I also want to be clear, we're only talking about 3.5 months here.
Yep.
And
It's going to go like that.
Yep.
and also, is there, if for some reason it comes in and we go, oh my gosh, this is not working out, it just ain't working, can we terminate instantly?
I mean, there's no reason you couldn't.
Okay,
Yeah.
just want to clarify that. That's a fail-safe if we've got some,
Then ombudsman becomes.
well.
Yeah,
no,
So,
we'll just-
so I think it sounds like if and after, well, let me start over. So Joe did say, of course, he's going to have to get approval from his board as well, but he thought that he could make that happen right away. And I know he was going to be contacting, yesterday was going to be contacting his chair. But I would think within a business day or two, Dan and I would have a good sense of when we're going to have that agreement ready to present. And hopefully then we would be able to, schedule a special session to look at that.
So with that, so we have, that's kind of that one piece, right? Which we'll have to make a motion and to vote to designate, whether it be Dan or Owen and Dan together. It probably might be good, in my opinion, to have Owen involved too, since he was already involved in the process yesterday, to pursue that with Joe Morlock. The other piece that we worked on tonight was the ombudsman role.
I liked your ambassador. It's just
I like the
rolls off
ambassador.
tongue
I think
better.
it rolls. I trip over ombudsman. That's a real hard one. So superintendent, ambassador, superintendent, whatever the role we is. that we'd like to utilize Kevin in for the next 3.5 months. We could designate, I would assume we could designate tonight, and then we could work with him on roles and responsibilities going forward, and then maybe come back to the next meeting and have a readout and have a list of what those roles and responsibilities are at the April 8th meeting. I'd be glad to help work with Kevin on helping develop that. I'd gladly volunteer if anybody else wants to help me. I'd be glad to do that.
I'd like to see Derek be involved in that if you're willing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I don't know if you want two people probably.
Yeah, two.
yeah, I'm, I like I said, I just volunteered mine. If you guys are comfortable with that, if you're comfortable with Derek, great too. I'd love to have more people involved. So, with that being said, do we want to move towards our first motion? Or is there any further discussion that we need, at least on, that, working towards with Dan and Owen with Joe Morlock on Willamette ESD? Any other questions or comments, thoughts?
No, I don't think so.
No.
I'll just say I have a lot more peace than I did an hour ago. So that means something to me.
You ready for a motion?
Yeah.
I'll accept the motion.
I moved that we appoint Dan Bush and Owen to work on a IGA with WESD about their superintendent, Joe Murdoch, taking over being our acting superintendent till the end of the fiscal year.
Second?
It's been moved and seconded to appoint Dan and Owen to work with the Willamette ESD to work out, as you stated, an IGA or an intergovernmental agreement to have Joe Morlock as our superintendent, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Through the end of the fiscal year, which would be June 30th, 2024. Any further discussion on that? Okay, Debbie?
Derek,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes?
Owen,
Yes.
Phil,
Yes.
Josh,
Yeah.
all in favor.
Okay, great. The other item we have on the table here, as we've discussed, is appointing Kevin Palmer as our superintendent ambassador to really work with our principals, with our staff, with our teachers, to help rally everybody together to work on our district culture, and with other roles and responsibilities to be determined. And like I said, I did volunteer. If you guys are good with that, I know Derek would like to help with that too. So, if anybody would like to make a motion?
So I move that we appoint Aaron and Derek to develop a roles, responsibilities, and expectations for the position of Silver Falls ambassador, to work with the teachers, staff, public, students, et cetera, to help rally us and bring us together. I think I'll just stop there. I think that's period.
Do we want to include names on that?
Yeah.
Names?
Like we talked with Kevin, or
Point.
did you say Kevin? Or did
Oh,
you say
I'm sorry. I didn't specifically say Kevin. Gosh, now what did I say? I'll have to reform the whole thing. Did you write that down? I'm just wondering if I can add Kevin somehow at the end there without changing the whole thing.
Owen moved to appoint Aaron and Derek to develop a role and responsibility and expectations for the position of Silver Falls ambassador to work with teachers, staff, public, students, etc., to help us rally and bring us together.
I second it.
And appointing
Sorry.
Kevin Palmer to that position.
Oh,
Well, I'm struggling because I don't want to appoint anybody to the position without having the position be defined and created. So, if you're all comfortable, I mean, if you're all comfortable, my thought would be is that we would define this document, and then at our next board meeting, we would agree to the role and the document and appoint Kevin at that point in time. I guess that's what I had in mind. So I'll stick with that motion. If nobody wants to second it. then-
Okay.
yeah, that makes sense. I'll second that.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded that designate myself and Derek to work to develop roles and responsibilities of the Silver Falls School District Ambassador to work with teacher staff
Public.
and the public. This is
Rally
very long.
together.
To work with teacher staff and public to
Help us rally.
help us
bring
rally
together.
and bring us together.
Super simple.
That's so many words.
Lawyers get paid by the word, so.
All right, moved, seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, Debbie.
Derek,
Yes.
Tom,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Owen,
Yes.
Phil,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
all in favor.
Okay.
And depending on your turnaround time, if you got that turned around by the time we got the IGA turned around, we could also get that on the special meeting, because I think if we could pair that up, that would be
Yeah.
ideal.
That would
Yes,
be,
it
So just
that would be
just
great.
to give you a little motivation.
Yeah.
And you get, just to confirm dates, you guys are going to try and have the IGA done by,
Well,
It'll depend a little bit on their avail. I think we could probably get it done in a week.
I think so, yeah.
So,
And I would imagine he'd be working pretty handedly with Mr. Morlock as well.
So by the end of
A
next
lot
week.
of communication between those two, I imagine.
So we
Yeah, if you could
shoot-
target Wednesday, Thursday, give us a little bit buffer, that'd be great.
okay.
Yep, okay.
Yeah, I'm sure Dan will be reaching out to them probably tomorrow and.
Yeah, I already have a meeting with them tomorrow to kind of get some of the business stuff lined up. So I already got that rolling.
And
Okay.
Aaron or whoever, if you could kind of keep a pulse on it for all of us, if we're looking at 3 days away, or, you know, if something gets closer,
Yep.
that
Derek and I will keep you informed. Okay. All right, without objection, we are adjourned. Thanks a lot.